The judge adjusted his glasses, peering down at the papers in front of him, his voice sharp and probing. "Mr. Homan, you deported a group of migrants. Many were fleeing war, desperate, without even basic documents. Is this your idea of justice?" Tom Homan stood tall, straightening his jacket, his gaze locked on the judge. "Justice? I'm talking about security. Those people crossed illegally. We don't know who they are. Innocent? Criminals? You think that's a risk worth taking?" The judge frowned, tapping his pen lightly on the desk. "Do we have to assume everyone's a criminal? Mercy holds a society together. Our laws exist for humanity, don't they?" Homan's lips twitched into a faint smirk, but his eyes stayed hard. "Mercy's a nice word, but out there, it doesn't work that way. Gangs, traffickers, drug dealers, they use the same routes. If we leave the borders wide open, who do you think we're protecting?" The judge leaned forward, his tone rising slightly. "What about the children? The women? They're not criminals. Sending them back, how does that solve anything?" Homan took a deep breath, then fired back. "My name is Tom Homan, and I'm doing this for the American people. I've seen bodies in the desert, kidnapped kids, raped women, families left to die. It's not just the migrants suffering, it's our people too. My job is to protect everyone. If I secure the border, I cut down on that misery." The judge paused, shuffling his papers. "But you can't ignore individual stories. Lumping everyone together isn't fair." Homan tilted his head slightly. "What's fair? Letting an unknown crowd walk right in? You assume they're all innocent. I weigh the risk. Which one makes more sense?" The judge pursed his lips, a faint tremor in his voice. "Still, being this harsh, isn't it inhumane?" Homan's eyes flashed. "Inhumane is leaving a country defenseless. No borders, no protection for citizens. You live in theory. I face reality." A murmur rippled through the courtroom. The judge cleared his throat, trying to regain composure. "What about international obligations? We can't just shut the door on asylum seekers." Homan shot back, unflinching. "Shutting the door and controlling it are two different things. Legal paths exist, but if you excuse illegal crossings, those obligations stay on paper. In reality, it's chaos." The judge glanced away, pretending to study his files. "Chaos? You're exaggerating." Homan stepped forward, his voice cutting through the air. "Exaggerating? Dead bodies in the desert aren't an exaggeration. Kids vanishing into gang hands aren't an exaggeration. Teens poisoned by drugs aren't an exaggeration. You don't see it because you're up there. I'm down in it." The judge dropped his pen, his hand unsteady. "But these policies, they're too harsh. There has to be a more humane way." Homan smiled, a cold, deliberate smile. "The humane way is securing the border. Uncontrolled entry doesn't save anyone. Not the ones coming, not the ones already here. You call it mercy. I call it weakness." Silence fell heavy. The judge tried to speak, but the words caught in his throat. "Mr. Homan, Homan cut him off. "You play with laws. I enforce them. Which one keeps a country standing?" The judge went quiet. Reporters scribbled furiously. Someone whispered, "Homan crushed him." The judge muttered, gathering his files. "The case is postponed." Homan nodded slightly, leaving one final remark as he turned away. "If you've got laws, enforce them. Otherwise, what's that bench for?" The judge sat back, eyes darting nervously as he flipped through his notes. The courtroom buzzed faintly, tension simmering among the onlookers. Homan stood firm, unshaken, his presence dominating the space. The judge found his voice again, though it wavered. Mr. Homan, I said postponed, but this isn't over. Many of those migrants are innocent. You have to acknowledge that. Sending them back could be a death sentence. Homan didn't blink. They might be innocent, but we don't know. No ID, no records, no history. When someone knocks on your door, don't you ask who's there? A country's the same? The judge scowled. This isn't a house, it's a nation. Nations have to respect human rights. Homan shook his head slightly. We do, but our first duty is to our own people. Last month, we caught a gang leader posing as a migrant. Had 3 kids with him, all kidnapped. How do you explain that? The judge hesitated, then replied weakly, That's an exception. Homan's voice sharpened. An exception? We see exceptions like that every week. Traffickers use women and kids as shields. You say let them in, but they don't escape here. They disappear into gang hands. The judge looked at his files, searching for something to grasp. What about the data? Most migrants don't commit crimes. Studies prove it. Homan let out a dry laugh. Studies? You sit up there reading papers. I'm out there facing facts. Stats don't count the bodies in the desert. They don't track the kidnapped, the lost. You see numbers. I see tragedy. The judge leaned forward, a hint of anger in his tone. But these harsh measures punish the innocent. Isn't there a balanced approach? Homan paused, then answered evenly. Balance is controlling the border. I support legal entry. But if we tolerate illegal crossings, we get chaos. Does chaos protect the innocent or destroy them? The judge fell silent. Whispers spread among the spectators. A reporter jotted down, Homan 1, Judge 0. The judge cleared his throat, trying to steady himself. The international community is watching. Turning away asylum seekers damages our reputation. Homan narrowed his eyes. Reputation? Let a country collapse, and you've got no reputation left. If we can't secure our borders, what are we defending? Other nations lock their doors tight while preaching to us. The judge raised an eyebrow. But we should set an example. Mercy is leadership. Homan's response was swift and cutting. You say mercy isn't weakness, but unchecked mercy is exactly that. A nation stands on borders and laws. Bend the laws, and what are you representing up there? The courtroom went still. The judge stared at his papers, speechless. Homan pressed on. Look, I don't see anyone as the enemy. But here's the truth. Letting an unknown crowd in is a gamble, and the American people lose that bet. The judge stammered, Mr. Homan, you're too rigid. Homan tilted his head. I have to be. Reality out there is rigid. You don't see it, but I live it. The judge said nothing. A student in the crowd muttered, He just demolished him. The judge gathered his papers, his voice shaky. The case needs further review. Postponed. Homan replied calmly, turning to leave. If you've got laws, use them. Otherwise, this is just theater. The judge slumped slightly, his fingers fumbling with the edges of his files. The air felt thick, charged with the weight of the exchange. Homan adjusted his stance, calm but commanding, his victory clear to everyone watching. The judge tried again, his tone softer but desperate. Mr. Homan, think about the optics. Deporting families, it looks heartless. We can't be that nation. Homan crossed his arms. Optics? I'm not here to win a popularity contest. I'm here to stop the bleeding. You want families safe? Secure the border so they don't risk the desert in the first place. The judge blinked, grasping for a counter. But they're already here. We can't just discard them. Homan's voice grew firm. They crossed illegally. We've got legal channels for a reason. Ignore that, and you're inviting more to take the same gamble. How many die on the way? You're not saving them. You're enabling the mess. The judge rubbed his temple. Enabling? We're offering refuge. Homan stepped closer, his tone unwavering. Refuge comes with rules. No rules, and it's not refuge, it's a free-for-all. Last week, we found a group with fake IDs. 2 were wanted for murder. That's who slips through your refuge. The judge's eyes widened, but he pressed on. Those are outliers. Most are just seeking a better life. Homan didn't budge. Outliers kill, outliers traffic, outliers destroy. You can't tell me who's who without vetting. I've seen the fallout. Cartels thriving, towns overwhelmed. That better life turns into a nightmare for everyone. The judge's voice cracked. But mass deportation, it's too much. Homan's gaze hardened. Too much is doing nothing. Too much is watching drugs flood in, kids vanish, families break. I don't deport for fun. I do it because the alternative is collapse. The judge stared, mouth opening then closing. The crowd buzzed louder. A reporter whispered, "He's untouchable." The judge tried one last angle. "What about compassion? We're better than this." Homan's response was ice cold. "Compassion without control is reckless. You want to help? Fix the system. Until then, I'll keep the line intact. That's my compassion, for the people already here." The judge slumped back, defeated. "Case? Postponed," he mumbled, barely audible. Homan turned away, his final words ringing out. "Laws exist for a reason. Enforce them or step aside." The judge sat motionless, his hands resting limp on the desk. The courtroom hummed with low voices, the tension palpable. Homan stood steady, his posture unrelenting, his words still echoing in the room. The judge rallied for one final push, his voice thin. "Mr. Homan, not every migrant is a threat. We can screen them, process them, give them a chance." Homan nodded slightly. "Screen them how?" "No papers, no history. Half the time, no names. You're guessing. I don't guess with people's lives." The judge frowned. "We have systems for that. Asylum courts, interviews. It's not perfect, but it works." Homan cut in sharply. "Systems clogged with millions. Courts backlogged for years. Meanwhile, they're here, unvetted. Last year, a screened guy turned out to be a smuggler, slipped through, killed 2 cops. That's your system working?" The judge flinched, then recovered. "Mistakes happen, but we can't punish everyone for a few bad actors." Homan's voice rose, steady and forceful. "A few? One mistake is too many when it's your family paying the price. I've seen towns gutted by drugs, kids hooked before their teens, all because we let the wrong ones slide. That's not punishment, it's consequence." The judge shook his head, exasperated. "You're fear-mongering. It's not that dire." Homan leaned in, his tone unrelenting. "Fear-mongering? Tell that to the parents burying their kids. Tell that to the girls sold by traffickers. I'm not making this up. I'm cleaning it up. You're blind to it." The judge's hands trembled slightly. "There's got to be a middle ground. We can't just shut everyone out." Homan straightened, his voice calm but piercing. "There is a middle ground. Legal entry, vetting, control. Anything less, and you're rolling the dice. I don't play games with a nation's safety." The courtroom fell silent again. The judge stared blankly, his argument crumbling. Someone muttered, "He's relentless." The judge whispered, "Postponed again." Homan walked off, leaving a parting shot. "If you won't uphold the law, don't expect me to sit quiet."